Nobody expected this. Nobody. Not FIFA, not the fans, not the billions of people around the world who had been counting down the days to the biggest sporting event on the planet. But here we are. The 2026 World Cup, hosted on American soil for the first time in over 3 decades, is teetering on the edge of a crisis so massive, so embarrassing, so deeply political that even the people inside FIFA's own headquarters are whispering the same terrifying question behind closed doors. Can the United States actually pull this off? Let that sink in for a second. The most powerful sports nation on Earth, the country that prides itself on doing everything bigger, louder, and more expensive than anyone else, the country that looked the entire world in the eye and said, "Trust us," is now watching its World Cup dream crack apart at the seams. And the only reason this tournament hasn't completely collapsed yet, it's not American organization, it's not American money, it's not American leadership, it's Canada and Mexico. 2 neighbors, 2 nations that America has spent years pushing around politically, economically, and diplomatically. 2 countries that were brought into this tournament almost as an afterthought, given a handful of games, a supporting role, a polite nod at the table. And now they are the ones holding this entire operation together while the United States scrambles in panic mode. But that was only the beginning of the story. To understand how we got here, you have to go back. Way back to 2018 when FIFA awarded the 2026 World Cup to a joint bid, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, in what was supposed to be a historic moment of continental unity. The bid was beautiful on paper. 60 games spread across 16 cities, 3 nations, 1 shared dream. FIFA loved it, the sponsors loved it, the broadcasters loved it, the whole world loved it. What nobody talked about, what nobody wanted to talk about, was the tension boiling just underneath the surface. Because even as those 3 nations smiled for the cameras and shook hands on stage, the political reality between them was becoming uglier by the day. Trade wars, border disputes, immigration crises, tariff battles, diplomatic insults flying in both directions. The relationship between the United States and its 2 closest neighbors had become something that looked less like a partnership and more like a powder keg waiting for a spark. And then the spark came. It didn't come from a stadium. It didn't come from a player or a referee. It came from Washington. Policy decisions, political posturing, rhetoric that sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles in Ottawa and Mexico City. Suddenly, the governments of Canada and Mexico were being asked a very uncomfortable question by their own people. Why are we helping America host a party when America is treating us like enemies? Social media exploded overnight. In Canada, fans and politicians alike began asking why Canadian cities were pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into infrastructure, security, and logistics for a tournament where the United States would collect the lion's share of the glory and the revenue. In Mexico, the anger was even sharper. Mexican officials who had once been enthusiastic partners started going quiet, then cold, then openly critical. Millions of fans across Latin America, fans who bleed soccer, who live and breathe this sport in a way that most Americans simply don't, started watching with fury as the country hosting their World Cup seemed to be doing everything possible to make them feel unwelcome. And that's when the real problem started. FIFA was watching all of this. Every press conference, every political statement, every angry tweet, every leaked internal memo. And what FIFA saw terrified them. Because FIFA had been down this road before. They knew what happened when a host nation's political chaos infected the tournament. They had seen it. They had survived it. But never on this scale. Never with this much money on the line. We're talking about a tournament projected to generate over $11 billion. We're talking about broadcast deals that cover every corner of the planet. We're talking about 48 teams, hundreds of thousands of traveling fans, and the eyes of 5 billion people.
If this thing falls apart, it doesn't just embarrass America. It bankrupts dreams. It destroys legacies. It sends the entire global soccer ecosystem into free fall. Behind the scenes, FIFA President Gianni Infantino was making calls, urgent calls, calls that never made it into the press releases. There were emergency meetings. There were quiet conversations between FIFA executives and government officials from all three nations. There was, according to multiple sources close to the situation, a level of internal panic inside FIFA House that hadn't been seen since the corruption scandals of 2015. Then, things got even worse. Logistical nightmares began surfacing in the American host cities. Visa processing delays were creating chaos for international fans trying to enter the country. Supporters from certain nations with complicated relationships with American immigration policy, were finding it nearly impossible to secure travel clearance in time. Imagine being a soccer fan from a country that qualifies for the World Cup for the first time in a generation. Imagine saving for years, planning for months, and then being turned away. Not because of anything you did, but because of politics, because of bureaucracy, because someone in Washington decided that the rules mattered more than the moment. The global outrage was immediate. Fan groups from across Europe, Africa, Asia, and Latin America began organizing. Online petitions circulated with millions of signatures. Former players, legends of the game, began speaking out publicly. Even some American soccer figures, people who had spent their entire careers building the sport in this country, started expressing concern. The narrative was shifting, and it was shifting fast. America wasn't just struggling to host a World Cup. America was becoming the villain of its own story. And here's where Canada and Mexico stepped in, quietly, strategically, and with a confidence that nobody in the sports world had predicted. Canadian officials worked overtime to streamline their border processes, making their host cities more accessible, more welcoming, more organized. Toronto, Vancouver, cities that had already been praised for their infrastructure, now became beacons of competence in a tournament that desperately needed some good news. FIFA insiders began pointing to the Canadian venues as models, templates, proof that this tournament could still be saved. Mexico City was even more dramatic. The Estadio Azteca, one of the most iconic venues in all world soccer, a stadium that has hosted 2 World Cup finals, was set to host the opening match of the entire tournament. Think about that. The opening match. The moment that sets the tone for everything. The moment that the whole planet watches. And FIFA had given that honor to Mexico, not to New York, not to Los Angeles, not to Dallas, to Mexico City. And when it looked like political tensions might jeopardize even that, when it seemed like the drama between Washington and Mexico City might overflow into the actual tournament, Mexican officials held the line. They delivered. They showed up professionally, diplomatically, and with a grace under pressure that earned them respect from every corner of the soccer world. Even longtime FIFA supporters couldn't believe what they were witnessing, because what was unfolding wasn't just a logistical story. It was a power story, a story about who actually controls the biggest event on the planet. And the answer that's making certain people in Washington very uncomfortable, is that right now, in this moment, it isn't America. The financial consequences are already beginning to ripple outward. Sponsors who had built entire marketing campaigns around smooth American-hosted perfection are quietly asking questions. Some have already begun contingency planning. Insurance companies covering tournament-related events are reportedly raising their risk assessments. Hotel chains, airlines, and hospitality companies that had made massive bets on this tournament generating record tourism numbers are now watching nervously as international travel interest shows signs of softening in key markets.
Billions of dollars hanging in the balance because of politics, because of pride, because of a failure of leadership at the exact moment leadership was needed most. At the same time, something fascinating was happening in the global soccer community. Countries that had historically played second fiddle to American soft power were suddenly watching this situation with a very different kind of interest. European soccer federations, South American football confederations, governing bodies across Africa and Asia, they were all watching, and some of them were already talking, privately, carefully, but unmistakably, about what the future of World Cup hosting might look like if America couldn't get its act together. The 2030 World Cup, the 2034 World Cup, the future of FIFA's most valuable property, all of it suddenly felt less certain, less American,
less controlled by the nation that had assumed, almost as a birthright, that it would sit at the center of global soccer for the next generation. What happened next stunned everyone. A coordinated statement, carefully worded, diplomatically precise, but with an edge sharp enough to cut, emerged from soccer officials representing multiple confederations. Without naming the United States directly, the message was unmistakable. The integrity of the tournament must not be held hostage to the domestic political climate of any single host nation. Fan access, visa processes, security protocols, everything must meet FIFA standards. No exceptions, no excuses. It was a warning shot, fired in public, at the United States of America. Millions of fans watched it unfold in real time and felt something they hadn't expected to feel: vindication. Because these weren't just soccer fans anymore. These were people who had been told for years that America always delivers, America always leads, America always wins. And now they were watching the country stumble on the world's biggest stage while its neighbors, quietly, competently, and almost effortlessly, held the whole thing together. Here's what nobody is saying out loud, but everybody is thinking. If Canada and Mexico weren't in this tournament, if they hadn't been there, absorbing the pressure, delivering on their commitments, providing the organizational backbone that the United States was failing to provide, the 2026 World Cup might already be in a full state of collapse. Not a partial crisis, not a manageable setback, a collapse. The kind that ends careers, the kind that gets written about in history books as the moment American sports arrogance finally met its match. And the cruelest irony: the two nations that saved this tournament are the same two nations that America spent years treating as problems to be managed rather than partners to be respected. Canada, the polite neighbor to the north that America always underestimates. Mexico, the proud soccer nation to the south that America often dismisses. Both of them, together, carrying the 2026 World Cup on their backs while the United States figures out whether it actually wants to be a host or just a headline. The clock is ticking. The tournament is coming whether anyone is ready or not. The teams will arrive. The fans will travel. The games will be played. But when the history of the 2026 FIFA World Cup is finally written, when the documentaries are made and the books are published and the real story gets told, there will be a chapter that makes a lot of Americans very uncomfortable. It will be the chapter about the moment their country almost destroyed the greatest show on earth. And it will be followed immediately by the chapter about how two nations, two neighbors, stepped in and refused to let that happen. Because at the end of the day, soccer doesn't care about politics. Soccer doesn't care about tariffs or border walls or diplomatic tensions. Soccer cares about one thing: the beautiful game. And right now, Canada and Mexico are playing it better than anyone. The question that should be keeping American soccer officials awake at night isn't whether the 2026 World Cup will happen, it's whether America will deserve the credit when it does.